So, Athriya, just one quick thing. Dean Kathleen will join us towards the end, around 5:50 p.m. And
Okay.
so this is going to just go till right towards the end. You're not going
Sure,
to...
sure. And Dipanshu, I was going to keep about 20 minutes for Q&A. You think that is okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
okay.
It's all your and there was discretion.
We have live now.
Okay.
Please go ahead. We are live.
Hello, everyone. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists and our respected faculty anchors. On behalf of the ISDS organizing team, I, Abhiraj Nayak, would like to extend our sincere gratitude to all our respected participants for agreeing to be a part of our efforts in engaging with something as critical and crucial as the issue of climate change. Now, giving a quick overview of the theme that we are going to discuss in the current panel discussion, the theme we are going to deal with is alternative development paradigms in the context of the pandemic. The pandemic has disturbed economic activities across the world. This has had a tremendous impact on our lives and livelihoods, forcing us to pause and revisit the current growth-centric economic model. This has sort of reignited the growth versus degrowth debate, and it is in this context that we would like to set the stage for today's discussion. Before handing over the floor to our respected faculty anchor, I would request my colleague Sanskrita Tripathi to proceed with the introduction of all our esteemed participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Debasmita. So our first panelist for this panel is Mr. Abhiraj Nayak. Mr. Nayak is currently working as an independent advisor, educator, and justice consultant. He is also a visiting faculty at Azim Premji University. He completed his master's in law from Yale Law School, USA, and graduated from National Law School of India University, Bangalore. He is also a co-founder of an organization called Initiative for Climate Action, which is a non-profit and has a vision that imagines, enables, and accelerates low carbon and zero carbon futures of justice and sustainability. Thank you, sir. We are glad to have you here today. Next, we have Dr. Divya Karnad. Ma'am Karnad is an assistant professor of environmental studies at Ashoka University. She has a PhD in geography from Rutgers University, USA, and a master's in wildlife biology and conservation from the postgraduate program run by National Center for Biological Sciences and Center for Wildlife Studies. Based on the results of her PhD work, Dr. Karnad co-founded In Season Fish, a sustainable seafood initiative. The focus of this work is to connect seafood consumers to fishermen using sustainable practices in order to promote grassroots level change across the fisheries. She was also one of the 3 recipients of the Future for Nature 2019 awards for her work on sustainable fishing of sharks and olive ridley sea turtles. We welcome you, ma'am, and we are delighted to have you here today. Lastly, we have Mr. Leo Saldana. Mr. Saldana is a full-time coordinator of Environment Support Group. He has gained wide-ranging experience in the area of environmental law and policy, decentralization, urban planning, and a variety of human rights and development-related issues, working across many sectors for over a decade. He is a keen campaigner on critical environmental and social justice issues and has guided several campaigns demanding evolution of progressive laws and effective actions. In 2007, he co-authored the book Green Tapeism, a review of environmental impact assessment notification 2006 with his team members at ESG. He has since then co-authored several extensive pieces about environment and ecosystems. He has a background in environmental sciences and has been invited as a speaker by organizations and universities. He, in recognition of his contribution to environmental and social justice efforts, Association for India's Development, USA, made him his first Sathi. We welcome you, sir, and thank you for agreeing to be a part of our panel today. Lastly, I would like to introduce you all with our faculty moderator, Professor Adre Majumdar. Professor Majumdar is working as assistant professor at Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. Dr. Adre is a historical and political anthropologist with a focus on the impact of capitalism on space and time. She received her PhD from the Department of Anthropology at Yale University. She also has a law degree from National Law School of India University, Bangalore. Her monograph, Time, Space and Capital in India, Longing and Belonging in an Urban Industrial Hinterland, was published in 2018 by Routledge. With these words, I would like to give the floor to Professor Atre to take forward the discussion.
Thanks, Sanskrita and Dibasmita. Hi, everyone. Thank you for making the time on a weekend to come to this panel, and thank you, panelists mostly. We are very fortunate to have here today three panelists who are marked by different parts of the landscape of environmental advocacy in India today. We have a full-time, one of the most well-known environmental advocates of India, Leo Saldana. We have an environmental academic and also activist, Abhiraj Nayak, and we have Divya Karnad, who's a professor of environment studies at Ashoka University. We are most lucky to have these three panelists together at one panel today to discuss a somewhat utopian question. What would the Indian economy in a climate-friendly model look like? That is the main question for this panel. And with that, I throw open the panel. My first question, so the way it'll go is that I will direct each question to one of the panelists. If any other panelist wants to jump in with a comment, they're welcome to do so after the first panelist response. And we will at the end have 20 minutes for Q&A with the audience. All right. So my first question is that we hear a lot about the growth versus development debate. Development, the word, is somehow supposed to be more equitable than the growth model. And my question is, in this growth versus development versus degrowth kind of landscape of intellectual debates, where do you stand? My first question is to Mr. Abhiraj Nayak. If anybody else wants to respond, please jump in after Abhay.
Thank you, Atri. So I must, at the outset, just warn you that my connection is a bit unstable. So if I am not coming through clearly enough, I might turn off my video to allow at least my words to come through. Thanks, firstly, to the organizers, particularly, I think, Sanskrita and Debasmita, who I've seen been putting a lot of work into really curating and designing this entire series of events. And I was super impressed by the sophistication and nuance that was a part of the program design. So kudos on that. As regards your question, Atri, where do I stand on that? I think the I gets split up into the intellectual, philosophical and normative me, and the very human, less than ideal materialist me. And the yearning, of course, both in my thinking and in my activities would be for an imagination that is quite aligned with a degrowth approach. I wouldn't necessarily use the word degrowth. My own articulation of it would be more in tune with, let's say, a Gandhian imaginary, a cosmology that Adivasi people and indigenous communities from across the world sort of live out in their day-to-day practices. And the essence to it, I think, is, as you correctly hinted, problematizing and destabilizing the word growth itself, right? The other word which I would sort of take aim at would be the word, or the two words rather, would be the words progress and the word development. And I think this sort of trinity, which has become holy in our imagination of economic thinking and how to structure our societal institutions, are sort of have at the base a sort of common root idea, which is some sense of movement in a linear fashion, that requires material accumulation, that has an imbalanced relationship with the non-human, and where everyone and everything can be uh, ascribed a quantified number or marker, and therefore ranked relative to each other. And that kind of imagination is one that I totally reject. And I would like nothing better than a world where our relations with the non-human are far more respectful of our connectedness with the non-human. And when I say our, I refer to human beings, and one where material consumption and accumulation is not the source of being powerful, being strong, being respected, being in some sense worthy of emulation. So a local, democratic, respectful of nature and degrowth type model would very much describe what I think is the way forward. That said, my final word on this is in my own living, I am still far removed from uh, this sort of imaginary. I continue to be very plugged into the capitalist system. I have a Zoom subscription, for example. I drive around a car. I smoke cigarettes, all kinds of things which are very much indicators of how my own conditioning is heavily influenced by a predatory capitalist logic. So a lot of work left in reformulating myself, and I haven't even gotten to my emotional space vis-a-vis other members who I interact with. I think you're on mute, Atre.
Yeah. Thank you, Abhiraj. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on that question? Okay. Yeah, Divya, yeah, please go.
I'm just happy to agree with Abhiraj in that I too am. I mean, I didn't actually hear these terms degrowth and even know what they meant until recently. But now that I've read up about it, I feel like my work is also more along those lines of thinking, and let me introduce another term into this now, thinking about limits and thinking about systems that cannot progress to infinity and beyond, but that there do need to be some limits on how much or in what ways and how we achieve this kind of progress and development. And certainly, I think in every aspect of our lives, there is some aspect of regulation, and perhaps this is something that we need to consider even when we are thinking about economics and growth and development.
If I may ask you a follow-up question, Divya, before we go into our second question, that can you say a little bit more about who gets to decide limits? The politics of limits seems very interesting to me. Who gets to decide limits, on what parameters and things like that? In your imagination, what would it be?
So when it comes to, I'm not exactly sure how large capitalist organizations work, because for the most part until now, I have not had very much to do with them. My work has been primarily with fishermen and direct resource users who work with, physical resources in that way. And my interactions with them have shown that to a large extent, people within those spheres themselves recognize the need for limits. And particularly people who have some aspect of thinking about the long term and thinking about the future are actively limiting themselves, and they are actively regulating themselves. So this is an important factor. I think there are some lessons also in terms of the whole COVID crisis and how that has demonstrated how people are willing to limit themselves. So for instance, during this lockdown, there was a lot of issues with respect to the fisheries because it wasn't made clear right in the beginning whether they could continue or not. So while during this time of chaos, the fisheries had entirely collapsed. And at that time, the government had sort of stepped in to provide rations and things like that. So there was a brief period when the government was subsidizing the fishermen in terms of their ability to access at least very basic food and rations and so on. The export markets had shut down, and things had kind of gone back to a moment in time when we were sort of fishing for ourselves. We were fishing for the local economies. And exactly what any conservationist or environmentalist would want to happen in terms of people limiting how much they went into the sea, how much they were catching, what they were catching, it all played out beautifully during that short period. And so this seems like it was like a small experiment in degrowth. And in terms of the environment, at least, it seemed to work beautifully.
Thank you, Divya, for that very inspiring account of a small local experiment with degrowth. Let me ask a larger kind of question about degrowth or the Gandhian model, as Abhiraj has put it. What would the Gandhian model look like in contemporary India, or any other genealogy that you might want to bring to the degrowth model? What would it look like? What are its defining characteristics, and how would it be employed or deployed in India? My question is to Divya.
How would it be deployed is a very interesting question in terms of the fact that we are now trying to race back to those good old days of high GDP. So at this point, I think if we were able to, and we were hoping that this whole COVID situation would be one where we stop and take stock of what has been happening and possibly make modifications. But I think perhaps Leo would be a good person to step in terms of trying to make these kinds of, make some headway in terms of policy level changes, and to actually enforce these kinds of regulations that would work at larger scales in terms of trying to implement some kind of shift in development models across the whole country. So perhaps he could step in here.
Leo or Abhiraj, do you want to step in?
I think Leo would, I'd love to hear from him on this.
Mute. You're on mute. Leo, you're on mute.
Okay, now can you hear me? Is my audio clear? Yeah, okay. So thanks for this opportunity, and really appreciate it. And don't worry about weekends. I'm sure that you guys wanted to have fun, but there's nowhere to go and have fun. Or if you do, it's at a very high risk. I mean, that's the kind of risk society that we now live in. And I'm saying this because a colleague of mine called this morning and said just 2 hours before we had to step into a very, very critical meeting, which went on for 6 hours with many authorities, that his father had tested positive. And so alarm bells were off. But then we said, we can't live like that. We can't live constantly worried about our lives. It's not like anyone wants to perish, but we must live intelligently out of this pandemic. And it's easy to say that, but there are different ways to relate with it. The fact that we live like this is an indicator of what Divya said is the limits, right? So obviously we have crossed the limits. And I must say that I want to start by start my response by also remembering Peter, who passed away day before night. A good friend, close friend, worked with him for almost 20 years, argued with him, fought with him. I mean, that's the quality of relationship which is humane, that we don't just get along, we actually argumentatively get along, but yet we stay together. And Peter was that kind of a person. And I also want to remember, observe that Stan Lurduswamy, a person who had a major impact on my growing up years, with whom from whom I had the opportunity of learn social theory, for instance, not from textbooks. Of course, there is a value in documentation and analysis, but this came from a man who had given his life to these kind of questions. So when we try to package it into education, I think we think that we can cram it all into our heads and then perform as if we are machines for the rest of our lives. So one of the first thing that I learned from both Peter and Stan, and these guys worked on the field, right, is the importance of unlearning every day. Right? So much is packaged in our head, so much is conditioned that we end up, like, what is the Gandhian model? What is the Marxian model? What is, Putin model or Trump model? It's not a question of prototypes. So I wanted to imagine, and if you cannot imagine with me, let's imagine that we are all aliens and we are visiting this planet, right? And we are coming close to it, and we observe that there are millions and millions of organisms, different types of organisms, and they're doing different things. And let's imagine that as aliens, we have the capacity to compress 5 million year Earth timescale into an observation of a few moments in alien time, right? Then we can see how things change, right? And we'll find that there is one species which is frenetic. The rest of them are rather still. Trees are slowly flowering, leaves are being put out, the rhizome is slowly sprouting, the mushroom suddenly, like humans, jumps up, the algal blooms take place, but there will be very, very few species who are frenetic and have an explosive growth, in contrast to almost everything else, right? So I think this is the point we have to get to. And people like Kumarappa, who is considered to be Gandhian economist, and I just wanted to show this book. I don't know if you can see this. This was written by a good friend, Venu, and the co-author is Deepak, where they looked at Kumarappa's work. And the idea of being gradual, about being still, is not just the idea of, still is not inertia. Still is the capacity of humanity to be gradual, to be slow, to find peace in that process, and to evolve. Because the idea is to evolve in thought, evolve in harmony, evolve as a species, evolve to become something better. Okay, that's what this beautiful pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan said, is all about. Frenetic is to be rapid, and that's a capitalist world. But let's not just lay the blame on capitalism. What we see as so-called communism is also that. I mean, the kind of industrial scale disasters that Russia has, or USSR, its predecessor, has gone through. It's not just the capital, it's not just the rivers burnt in North America. It also burnt across Russia, right? It's burning across China. I mean, it's a kind of anxiety-based living on this living planet, which is totally unnecessary because it's finally very destructive. It's destructive of the human body because it's not meant to be all the time anxious and be in a state of anxiety. And when you can peacefully live for 75, 80 years, you suddenly have an heart attack and die when you're in your 50s or even earlier. Like my brother died at the age of 43. And I used to think, why did he die so early? He was handling something like 500 to 600 calls every day. You see, I mean, I was thinking, does he have time to drink water? So that reminds me of Ivan Illich's amazing essay. It's called H2O and H2O and the Waters of Forgetfulness, in which he brings up the idea of sacred water. For us, everything has become material. It has become chemical. But chemicals formed life. We forget that. So the aspiration of a chemical or water molecule or a carbon is to actually form life. And over 2.5 billion years, we have this miracle that we are all part of, right? Because we don't find evidence elsewhere. So I think we have to always be humble from that perspective. I mean, every time I have a problem, I kind of think myself, suppose I remove myself far away from this pale blue dot, and I'm, say, orbiting in the way Neptune is orbiting. Do my problems seem serious and real? Is it catastrophic? I mean, it's so insignificant in the scheme of things, right? So I think that's the kind of wisdom with which the idea of limits come through. So the question really is, what is degrowth? For me, it's more like unlearning. Degrowth is not dismantling. Degrowth is being still. It's slowing down. It's like, listening to the birds and listening to the quiet. See, that is the kind of politics we want.
Thank you, Leo, for those very valuable insights. I'm thinking of the 90s report released by Center for Science and Environment with Arun Agarwal, and I forget the other author. Sorry?
Others, yeah. It was Anil and several others. Yeah, 1980.
Anil and several others. Yeah, Anil and others from the Center for Science and Environment, where they were pointing out that India claims to get away with the carbon footprint debate, hiding the environmentalism of the poor, hiding the fact that the poor have much lower carbon footprints than the rich, and the average kind of ends up showing India to have a low carbon footprint, although the rich have as high a carbon footprint as people in the West. And that was an eye-opener for me at the time that I first read it, and now I teach it. My question there is, what would happen in a degrowth model to things like livelihoods of the poor, to things like aspirations of the poor who have lived with little consumption levels, low consumption levels so far, and want to rise up in economically and want social mobility? What will happen if? So I realize the value, the wisdom of slowing down and being gradual. But will it affect adversely the livelihoods of the poor? And if so, what will we do about it? My question was for Leo, but if someone else wants to take it, okay. Leo, yeah.
I mean, I'll give a brief response to it. You started off by quoting Anil and the environmentalism of the poor, but I want to put a question back. Is that really a choice? We always romanticize and valorize the poor as frugal and living with little and low carbon footprint and all that. But broadly, I mean, I grew up not rich. I grew up from in a working class background, and for us, everything mattered. A piece of paper mattered, eraser mattered. I mean, school uniforms were once a year at best. There was no luxury in our lives, and that, I think, that gives me a sense of what frugality means. It doesn't mean that you enjoy it. You have no choice. You do that, right? And therefore I can relate with my parents and their parents' generations who were not from wealth. They were poor. And what I realized from my grandfather, who was a farmer, and now such a big deal is made out of being organic and farming and all that, that was a way. See, one of the things that we realized was the idea of living meaningfully with what is necessary, what is essential. And in fact, we could sing and dance in my grandfather's generation. We created our own weddings. We constructed cultural spaces and spaces of joy and grieving. You see, today it's not possible. Today it's become existential. It has become commodified. The whole thing is almost like a machine is there to organize events in our lives, right? So I think we have to worry about the construct that has become a dominating force in shaping our actions. And it is far more necessary today to be conscientious, far more necessary to collate the intelligences that we have, far more necessary to actually dissent away from the mainstream, and far more necessary, I would say, to try and practice knowing fully well individual actions matter to nothing, given the state of the planet and the type of disturbances that have taken place in the planet's climate. And I use the term global warming and not the dressed up term climate change. Uh, I find it extremely important that that individual action, despite being insufficient, must be persisted with so that it can find a time and space when it can suddenly become everybody's actions. So I think we are waiting for that opportunity. I don't call it a miracle. It's a critical mass that has to become a mass action.
Uh, Abhay or Divya, do you want to jump in to that debate?
I could, just in terms of this idea of aspirations of the poor, I think that's where I just wanted to stop and think about this idea of luxury and how we are sort of programmed to think that luxury is our aspiration, when in fact luxury technically is just it's like a different word for waste, essentially, because this is not anything that we need. It is not I mean, it's just like a dressed up version of already, I mean, things that we already have in our lives. And it's, for me, I have the luxury of, say, leaving my fan on for 5 minutes while I go answer the doorbell. Whereas my grandmother would have definitely not done that. And even now, when I come back and see that I've done that, I can hear her voice in my head saying, "What's wrong with you? How could you waste that?" And that in fact is luxury. So we sort of program people to think that this is what they want to aspire to waste, which I think is a bit ridiculous. And I think the degrowth model is in some ways not just turning this economic idea on its head, but also turning the social idea on its head. So why is it that the poor people have to aspire to some sort of a better life? Why can't we aspire to living lives like that, where we just live within our means? What makes our lives any better than theirs? So I don't know. That's where I stand on this.
Abhay, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I just want to, in a sense, speak with what both Leo and Divya have said. And I think the question, though very, very uh, regularly occurring in discourses around sustainability and transition to, let's say, non-capitalist imaginations, I think the question itself makes an assumption that uh, accumulation is good, right? And that's kind of what uh, Divya was alluding to as well. And it's not there's no easy resolution to it, right? If I say, if let's say I go out on a pulpit today and pronounce that we need to abandon the aspirations of having a house or having food that you can order from a Zomato or a Dunzo, or even saving anything more than 10,000 in your bank account, people will be like, who are you to say that? You've enjoyed a good life so far, da 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 da. And those responses are very legitimate responses. And therefore, one can't say, no, 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 let me tell you about the South American concept of buen vivir, or living well, which is not about material accumulation. It is about, in a sense, uh, just a entire new framing of knowledge, of affectivity, of spirituality, of resolving the separation between humans and nature. If and when I say that, people will quite legitimately be irked with me for sort of suggesting that they are very, very legitimate aspirations must be rewired. And uh, it's no answer for me to say that no, material accumulation will get you nowhere in life. So this is something that I've not seen actually resolved in all my conversations with all kinds of activists, academics, philosophers, and uh, 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 let's say indigenous elders. How do we get from where we are, the messed up, separated, absolutely corrupt and defiled way in which we live today, to a let's say, a pluralistic vision where many different worldviews are all accommodated, like the Zapatistas would have us believe as possible. That movement from here to there is going to be messy. It is going to require some people to say that we will give up on these aspirations, or it will require some people to say that you don't have to give up on these aspirations. We will in fact let go of all of our accumulation, and we will take the sacrifice if you wish. And it's not as simple as pressing a switch and transforming from here to there, right? And I mean, I should mention, as I was just thinking of this session, for me, let me flash a book as well. This is, I think, one of my the best resources on this. It's called Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary by Ashish Kothari, Ariel Saleh, Arturo Escobar, Federico Di Maria, and Alberto Acosta. And this has sort of 1,000 word entries from across the world, including Prakritik Swaraj from, I think, Divya's colleague Asim Srivastava, as alternative economic or material or well-being paradigms to sort of the homogenizing capitalist imagination. And wherever you see these examples, and these examples exist today, if one asks the question of how do I transform the world to be in the image of that system that actually seems to be operating from the heart as opposed to from the mind, and seems to be in tune with nature, there is no easy answer to how we'll get there. There will be some pain, there will be some sacrifice, there will be some people whose legitimate aspirations will be frustrated, and I guess the process there is always going to be dialogue, right? It's always going to be a motivation. It's always, so coming back, Atri, very squarely to your question, uh, uh, if I am encouraging folks to abandon a capitalist imaginary, and a person who is, let's say, the first generation in her family who finally has some income where she can afford to every now and then take her family to a restaurant for a meal, and she comes and says, yo, what's up? Why are you now sort of suggesting that money is not important? I have to engage in that conversation with her. I have to reassure her that the world I'm suggesting is good and possible, will be even better than this feeling that she now has of I have made it after being sort of deprived from material benefits for a long time. And I don't know, maybe at a more complex level, there can be accommodations also made for those who have struggled really to get to a particular place. Maybe in the transition there is some kind of additional comfort provided, or some kind of credit that is provided, not credit in the financial sense, but an acknowledgement of what the journey has been in that sense. And so the key takeaway for me is, and Atri, your own work and your book, I think, are very relevant here, is how does one think of the temporality? How does one think of the time? How does one think of if a transition or a switch to a worldview where the separation between body, mind, and human's nature, and inner, outer, all of those are being resolved, which capitalism has not resolved but has just perpetuated. How will that transition occur in a way that takes care of all of these very individual, very contextual, and very grounded stories of entitlement or expectation or injustice or justice as well?
Let me ask a follow-up question, Abhay. If the economy kind of goes on the gradual mode, then large numbers of small jobs will stop being relevant. Then other than engaging in dialogue with those people who will lose jobs, what can we do? What can the architects of the economy, that slow, gradual economy, do to provide alternative systems of alternative opportunities or infrastructures of survival to these people? Is there a way that the two can go together, the gradualness of the economy and the non sacrifice of those who are in the sectors that will shrink?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to repeat my response, but with slightly different language here. I think what I'm trying to say is the notion of jobs as they exist today will disappear in this transition. There is no conception that you need so much which puts you in the middle class or above poverty line anymore. Maybe so Manish Jain will use a word of not livelihoods, not he'll use the word of alivehoods, because what we have today, what are our jobs, are in by his book, and there are others who think like this. They're not livelihoods, but they are deadlyhoods or deadhoods. You know, we just despise the work we do. We're just waiting for Saturday to plug out. We're looking for any opportunity to sort of get some respite from our job or work, and this is an essential constituent of the accumulative capitalist imagination, right? So in the transition, there is no question of substituting that income as I see it, because then you're still stuck in the language and the imaginary of that which you're trying to break down, right? So it's almost a notion of some kind of prefigurative politics here, where you don't need a job because the food and the water and the green space and the laughter and the music and the love and the care and the joy and all of those beautiful things that Leo gave us an imagination of, you know, algal blooms and mushrooms popping up, really being connected to nature, are plentifully available. It might be a commune hippie setting that I'm describing here, or it could be a totally self-sufficient village returning back to the Gandhian dream, right? And so then you're no longer interested in having the job that you lost in the transition. What you're really interested in is being in the moment and living and loving life, right? And
Sure.
your needs, your survival needs, your community needs, your sense of purpose, all of the things that someone like Maslow will describe as, you know, the hierarchy of human needs, from survival to the self-actualization, all of those will be realized in this new. It's not an economic system; it's an economic, social. It's an entire new way of being in that sense, of which the economic is one, right? So I guess final word would be, I don't think a Buddhist monk worries about his or her job, right? Uh, they're not worried about the income that comes into their account. They're just totally immersed in the activities of the monastic order that they're part of, and their needs, simple though they might be, are in that sense provided for through that system.
Drawing from your response and moving into my next question, I want to remember Margaret Atwood's kind of horrific speculative fiction novel, Handmaid's Tale, where she's imagining a kind of very authoritarian regime called Gilead, which takes over the United States, where among, other than the human rights abuses and the misogyny and all of that, what they accomplish is environmental harmony. They stop all industrial activity through militarization. Through a certain kind of governmental authoritarianism, they force all modern capitalist industrial activity. So, and what Margaret Atwood shows at the end of the novel is that the subjects of Gilead are not happy. They want the freedom that capitalist Canada is offering them. So they're running away to Canada for the freedom of wearing whatever else you want, because in Gilead you have to wear a uniform. So it's a picture of authoritarianism that goes with that manages to accomplish with force, with coercion, a kind of environmental utopia. So drawing from Margaret Atwood, let me ask the question to Leo first and others if they want to jump in. What governmental steps need to be taken towards making this kind of climate friendly journey towards a utopian horizon? So a lot of dialogue has been flagged by all three of you, but I wonder what your demands of the governmental system would be. Leo first and then others.
Sure, thanks. I think you're helping us build a good conversation here and also constructing a very cogent argument. But let me say this, that when the framers of Indian Constitution were confronted with this dilemma of having to escape centuries of enforced poverty and devastation through colonization, and the need to speak to the aspiration of millions, at that time 300 million people, in a very, very large country which was not as integrated in terms of communication and road and rail network as we now have, and airplanes were obviously only for the super rich. The question perhaps to them is, what is the model of development that can bring us all together? A syncretic process that, because division had happened on religious lines. So it had to be syncretic, it had to be celebratory of the syncretic spirit which we lived in this region, right? So the idea of India was an imposed construct in many ways, because the idea of India did not exist as we now know it before 1947. It did exist in the freedom movement, but it was created as an outcome of British colonization, as we well know. Shashi Tharoor writes in his book, An Era of Darkness, about the nature of the economy as it existed in pre-colonial India. And he says, he gives a number to that. And I'm not a very great fan of GDP, but he says India's share of global GDP, when the East India Company stepped in, was 28%. The point is this, what were they making? They're making what they were making for hundreds and thousands of years. And if you go back to Tony Joseph's book, Tony Francis or Tony Joseph, I think, book, The Early Indians, and closely and he does that. He does closely examine what was this Harappan civilization all about. One of the amazing features of the Harappan civilization I was fascinated by was that there's a continuous account of living in what were densely populated cities of those times, right? And all the archaeological evidence points to the fact that there is no weapon of war. In the 700 years of documented history that they have traced through excavation in 130 sites, spreading from what is today's Gujarat to Haryana to Afghanistan and in between the spaces, there is no weapon of war. But it was a flourishing society. And it did not collapse because of war, but they feel there was a long drought, almost a 100 to 150 year drought. But some of the technologies which were evolved then of harvesting water is used even now. And one of the most significant efforts ESG has invested in is to try and protect what we call the tank irrigation system. It has a history of 5,000 years. You can go to Sri Lanka, you'll find it. You can go to Bangladesh, you can go across South Asia, and you'll find that very intelligent system. It was not necessarily something that was adopted in subsequent times to build equity and social justice. Because Isha Shah, for instance, did her PhD on the Vijayanagar Empire and how the tank irrigation system worked, and she finds feudal systems operated. And we know many tanks were built by feudal lords, and there was everything from oppression of Dalits to human sacrifice that went into building these structures, right? So the whole idea of building and I don't know what it was like when the Harappans built their cities, where the caste did not exist, obviously, at least from the archaeological remains. There doesn't seem to be a highly stratified society like we now find. For instance, if I show you a photograph of Bangalore now, I can just show you photographs and you'll say this is where the lower caste or poor people live, and this is where the upper caste and rich people live. You can easily make out that from the built area structure of the city, right? And so if you use the same technique to go back 5,000 years, and you will realize that there was perhaps a deep thinking of trying to create an egalitarian society, because why would you want a weapon of war if you can actually trade? So to return to the 28% figure that Shashi Tharoor gives, the type of trade that took place was not low skilled. It was extraordinarily skilled. I mean, if you go to the Dhaka Museum and you walk upstairs, you will see one of the finest things you find is a huge sari. And I'm not a fan of killing animals unnecessarily, but it was made of ivory, right? And where do you get that skill to weave a sari so beautiful? And from a material which you won't, obviously it's illegal now, but even if you were to say ivory is made out of some chemical and you want to, do we have the skills? So it goes on to document how the British factory system to be established was based on an horrific violence which the British instituted across South Asia, right? I'm not saying kings before them were all great. Some were benevolent, some were not. Different accounts are there, but there was a system of economy which flourished out of extraordinary skills which did not come from the means of production which the factory represents. And to connect it to the 1947 to 1950 constitutional debates and finally the adoption of the Constitution, Article 39 beautifully says it. The means of production should be such that it should not arrogate wealth to the few. It should be to the benefit of many. It's a simple thing to say, right? And the reason I'm bringing it all together is you brought up Atwood and this kind of dystopic imaginary that she builds in that novel. But just look at China. Okay, I've had an occasion to travel there across China, and what surprised me, and that was more than 10 years ago, 10 years ago at least now, and in fact, I interacted with government representatives, a large number of them, in a conference. And what I find is what we speak openly here, they can't speak openly there. In the main conference, they would not speak anything to me. But the minute we stepped out and had tea, they would talk, and more so if we actually went out and had a few drinks. So you see, there is a sense of repression that comes with amassing power and control. So capitalism is a system which is anti-life. It is anti-earth. But so is communism, as is practiced in USSR or Russia. I mean, what was Stalin about? What was Pol Pot about? If you have traveled those places, you will see the enormous damage they did to the people, to the society, to nature. And I think we have to be very critical of these type of systems of organizing governance. And we need to think beyond that. And that's the challenge for our times. Because if you don't, and we don't have time. You know, those times people had time. They had 50, 100 years to think through. Because here we have a new challenge which is rushing at us. East coast of America was battered with typhoons as the west coast was literally burning. And I always keep saying to myself, 4 years ago, Western Ghats had 800 fires in just the Karnataka stretch. The next year, Kerala floods it, right? What if we have a combination of fires in summer and floods a month later? What are we going to do? Now, we don't know the answer for that because we are not even putting the question on the table. We are not even making it a problem that we must start looking at and consider as a reality. And if you take all our metropolitan cities, not a single city has been spared with one or the other catastrophe, right? The word catastrophe has become normative. And that, you know, when I was a student in the 80s, catastrophe was something that would happen in the 21st century and we wanted to avoid it. And we're living it now. And we're kind of comfortable with the fact that the type of liberties that have been interwoven through the 48 Charter of Human Rights, through our Constitution, thousands of struggles, judgments, and so on, is so easily willing to abandon them and not even struggle to reclaim them. So I think there is this reality we have to deal with, even as you have to contend with the fact that we have to look beyond nation-state boundaries. The idea of economy surviving within nation states is gone. At the same time, $110 billion one man makes, Jeff Bezos, this year, of which $70 billion he made during the lockdown period. That kind of ugly, filthy wealth cannot happen, because then if you actually look at it, during the Roosevelt years, Paul Krugman has written about it, during the Roosevelt years, taxation of the super rich was as much as 90%. And post-war, it was 70%. And post-war USA actually had an enormous spread of wealth, and the middle class, as they talk of it now, was created during that time, from the Great Depression and the war into a stage where the wealth was created and USA became the dream country to go through, go to, right? In India, we have 78% wealth in the hands of 1%. And if you take the top 10% people in terms of income earning, 95% of the wealth goes to them. So that means 90% of people are living off 5% of the wealth. So we have created a far more catastrophic society than what the British left us with. So I think we have to acknowledge that this is the reality, and there is no escape from it. And I think during the pandemic, we just realized how cities can crumble, how homes can crumble, because people who keep us propped up decided to leave. You see, so these are our realities. And I just want to stop here, but I'm just giving a sense of the type of direction we should go to. Yeah.
And a number of economists are now speculating on what happens to the economy if migrant workers choose to not come back to the cities. And it's the autonomy of the migrant worker which is not even on the table so far. So there are human rights and environment sort of are related. Let me ask a last question and then we'll throw it open for Q&A. The word green growth is getting a lot of popularity these days. A lot of companies are coming up which are talking about green capitalism and green growth, and it's gaining cachet. Is it totally opposed to the climate paradigm, the climate friendly paradigm, and what do you have to say about it? Divya first and others later.
Yeah, I think thinking about things in terms of trying to fit them into existing models which we already know have problems and don't work, and perhaps are very single-minded in the way that they approach problems, whereas we know that we need a more holistic approach to solve problems. I think trying to fit our solutions into the same model itself is a problem, because maybe perhaps you could conceive that this kind of green growth may perhaps reduce carbon emissions, which of course I think a lot of work has shown that it doesn't. It perhaps just shifts the carbon emissions from the point of individual consumer to the point of factory level production of these solar panels or whatever else is being promoted in terms of green growth. But even otherwise, like, even if we were able to solve this particular crisis, in doing so, we are definitely going to produce another crisis of some other sort which we have not foreseen. And this is exactly what has been happening in the past, and there is no way in which that it's not going to happen in the future, because this is exactly the model that has been creating crisis after crisis, which all we've been doing so far is sort of some patch up job of handling that crisis while automatically creating another. So I personally don't think that green growth can be the solution, that we do need to think outside of this box in order to come up with a real solution for these kinds of problems.
Thank you. Abhay and Leo, do you want to respond?
Sure, I'll go very quickly. Yeah, I think I am in total agreement with Divya, and I just want to use the opportunity to share this really beautiful essay by Bayo Akomolafe, which is it's titled "What Does Climate Collapse Ask of Us?" And I mean the main point that I take away from him, and his language is truly a sort of dreamscape to traverse through, is it's time something ancient is asking us to take heed of the fact that to give account for the human centrality in modernity, and to recognize that this civilization is dead. So what he's effectively saying is the only way for wiser worlds to emerge is to die gracefully, for the civilization to die gracefully. And green growth, geoengineering, even the sort of, this might be blasphemous to many, but even the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, they're all based on we can balance it out, right? So we really need to, in that sense, just get rid of all vestiges and remnants of an accumulation separated culture. And until we heal that separation, which is a a very modern separation of between humans and nature. There is a big schism now between even masculine and feminine ways of thinking, between our left brain and our right brain. We're all wounded in modernity, and green growth is not going to heal that wound. What is going to heal that wound is possibly, going back to what Leo said, getting rid of war, getting rid of weapons. Why does India need to stockpile more weapons, right? And people will say, oh, China is aggressing. But I mean, India is playing to be a player in the military scene, while people are dying, while people don't have food, while people don't have any kinds of basic resources. So our imagination has to, in that sense, totally change, and something like a fake solution like green growth or even your smart cities paradigm will not provide the solution that's required.
Leo, did you have anything to add?
Yes, Abhay set it up nicely, and I want to say terms are abused and terminologies are abused for the convenience of those in power, right? And it's to me an image that sticks in my mind is when our blessed Prime Minister Narendra Modi walks into this space, which is going to be this great temple, and the way in which he walks in. Here is a point in Indian history which has caused so much torment and pain and agony and distrust, and it's turned into a sign of valor. To me, it's a manifestation of power that comes from a capacity or a willingness to be part of an aggrandization movement. You aggrandize power, you aggrandize wealth, you aggrandize resources, and that makes that person. You walk like that only when you become that. You see how Putin walks, you see how Trump walks, you see how Erdogan walks. I mean, you see every one of those dictatorial leaders and how they walk. There's no humility in the way in which they represent the people, which they do or they claim to do, right? So in much the same way, capitalism, for instance, is the most extraordinary example of how people who have managed to accumulate wealth walk. There are very, very few exceptions. But across the world, one exception could be Azim Premji. Truly, I've seen the man up close and I've not had the chance of interacting with him, but I've seen that he finds himself as a part of the machine in which he managed to accumulate wealth, right? But how many people like him do you find who do not use that openly, at least, to abuse that power to manipulate politics? You see, and look at Ambani and Adani and perhaps Jindals as well, and ask the question openly and critically, do they actually come within the framework of Article 39 of the Indian Constitution? You see, if they did, then there will be surrender of wealth, which many people have done. I mean, Buddha walked away, we say, and he became enlightened. You need to walk away from that to actually transform the world. Power is an unfortunate thing which gives you the capacity to feel larger than yourselves, but you're really small. You're totally insignificant. And that awareness is very, very, it has to be in our temporal space all the time. It's only then, I think, it is possible to find that kind of leadership which will use the appropriate terminology. So green growth is obviously a corruption. Green growth is a deliberate act. I mean, there's a paper I wrote 2 years ago, and today I discovered United Nations Environment Programs, it has one of the fronts in India called Sustainable India Finance Facility. They have blocked me from on Twitter. So I shared it with a few friends, and I can laugh about it because 2 years ago, what did I write? I wrote that Azim Premji gave 100 crores to Andhra Pradesh critical climate resilient zero budget natural farming, and then I found that 2.8 billion or almost $3 billion would be poured in from European investors to create natural farming in Andhra Pradesh. I was just thinking, like, really? And many farmers' movements have been part of this process. So what I find difficult is this green growth becomes like a catch-all phrase, right? Solar parks, you take the utility scale solar parks today. what was 170 gigawatts of ambition has now become 450 gigawatts of ambition for so-called renewable energy. Everything we rejected in the past few decades, including mini-idle, so-called mini-idle schemes, have been packaged as renewable. When did hydro become renewable? Hydro was never renewable, right? Just because water flows and continues to flow doesn't mean it will continue to flow, because it will get stuck. The amount of muck that Three Gorges project has gathered is sufficient to devastate, if the dam collapses, hundreds of kilometers of so-called civilization. So we have set ourselves up for an high-risk society. We have set ourselves up for collapse. The natural farming system is contrived. There's nothing natural about it. Contrived by artificial infusion of capital, which is based on a loan. So if that collapses, the farmers pay the brunt of the cost. And they will continue to commit suicide. 400,000 can become 800,000 because that model is being propagated as the model by Niti Aayog, right? So when you say green growth, climate friendly, and I find a lot of NGOs, or whatever they call themselves, have come with large infusions of cash. They talk about air pollution, they talk about climate, they talk about sustainable transport, they talk about, but they're not talking about the structural changes that are essential. They're not talking about the principles of Article 39. They're not talking about the spreading of wealth. So it's more like, a lot of rich people will say, we will teach you how to live, right? I just want to add one point here, and that comes from Marx, actually. I just found it. Marx said, man lives from nature. That is, nature is his body. Forget the gender insensitive term of those times. And he must maintain a continuing dialogue with it if he is not to die. To say that man's physical and mental life is linked to nature simply means that nature is linked to itself. For man is a part of nature. This is Karl Marx. Engels does it even more beautifully. I mean, look at the language these guys, obviously it's a translation. To make earth an object of huckstering, the earth, which is our one and all, the first condition of our existence, was the last step towards making oneself an object of huckstering. It was and is to this very day an immorality surpassed only by the immorality of self-alienation. And the original appropriation, the monopolization of the earth by a few, the exclusion of the rest from that, which is the condition of their life, yields nothing in immorality to the subsequent huckstering of the earth. I mean, this was written in the 18th century, right? The concept of commodifying earth and making it like a cheap thing that you trade with. Just the other day, I thought of, like two large water companies got together and went into the stock market in New York, and the water has become a commodity. And I actually was like wondering, I saw a video of our Prime Minister in which it was being circulated as a joke, but if you listen to the video, it says that it gives instructions to scientists, and now you can use windmills to sort of produce oxygen and make an oxygen capital intensive project out of it. Why would you even think like that? Who gave the authority to the Prime Minister to think like that? He is not supposed to think like that. You see, he can imagine in his private space and write a book. That's his freedom. But as a Prime Minister, I think he has to understand where the Constitution sets the limits for that.
Thank you, Leo. Deepangshu had a few comments, and then we'll throw it open for Q&A. Hi, Deepangshu.
Yeah, this has been such a fascinating conversation, and I've been very patiently trying to absorb the breadth of what we were really looking forward to. And I wanted to thank Leo sir, Divya and Abhay for some fascinating insights, and for Atreya for helping us navigate through this, because it's very difficult and complex. The layers by which, when you get into abstractions and extrapolations, but also try to make, I would say, existential and empirical sense in the way in which movements can happen. I had just, a couple of very quick thoughts, if I may be allowed to just, add that. And one of which is a term which was, as Divya included this term of limits, and the conversation kind of revolved largely around, or orbited around a lot looking at that term. But one term which I was etching to really get out was restraint. And in the sense of maybe in a way of a Gandhian terminology or a conceptual framework, what's really troubling to me, and as you know, as economics, the discipline has had a lot of issues from within in trying to grapple with concerns around an accumulative mindset. I don't necessarily feel that, and this is something for which I often argue, and we have intensive debates, that capitalism per se needs to be saved from capitalists, which is the kind of book that Rajan and Leo Zingalis wrote a decade back, which is to talk about capital as a way of organizing activity, but not really subsuming yourself with that accumulative mindset so as to speak of. So yes, I mean, farmers want to make money from what they are producing. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but till the time there is a way in which we can involve the environment as a principal stakeholder in our sense of thinking. But one thing I really find baffling, and I think this is something which is really bringing us to a difficult time in the current sense, is the lack of a moral compass, or let me put it this way, a self-restraining internal mechanism, which Leo sir, I think, was pointing out, is evident in the conduct, not only of the leadership, but the way in which aspirational structures, while watching a video on YouTube on what the idea or image of progress means or success means, is driving a lot of people towards. So what I'm trying to say is, we're constantly in a process of expanding our own selves without having that sense of, I wouldn't say reasoning, but an internal process of stillness, which Leo pointed out, where there is even a moment of realization that there is some kind of a compass of restraint that is required. I'm not only talking about from a spiritual sense of and I think that's one of the most corrupted words that is often put across, but I'm just saying the lack of a moral compass maybe is hurting us really bad at a time when the three C's of conduct, conscious, and consciousness are all in that midst of suffering, from the pain of having that lack of moral compass. But restraint is something which is going to make one at least initiate a process of change. And I've often said that the pandemic was a harsh process of coercive realization by nature for inducting, a pause or a restraint on the way in which I think we were all individually moving. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, if I may be allowed.
Anyone wants to jump in? Abhay, you or Divya?
Let me just briefly, I wouldn't say respond, but I think what Dipanshu was drawing our attention to is the idea of sacred. I think somehow we have become so mercantile and transactional in our relating with this amazing accident of the universe. And everything that we do as part of our education, our industry, our finance, our home lives, the consumption, makes us forget that. Because it takes away our attention, our alertness from that sense of being. And the minute you forget that sense of being and you become sort of industrialized, your being becomes industrialized, mechanized, to such an extent that you actually don't even know what that means. And in an age when most people are going to live in urban areas, would they know what silence means? for me, I live outside the city, and thankfully for me, behind my house, there's still 5,000 acres of open space. So I get up to bird calls. My wake-up call is I have something like 80, 90 species of birds to wake me up. Now, can I ask in Delhi or Bombay, you have that luxury? You know what I'm saying? It's not that we cannot have it everywhere. We can build cities in a way that birds can come everywhere. In fact, we have been working with the Metro Bangalore, for instance, to save an amazing garden, which is called the All Saints Church Garden. It's a sacred space which has evolved for 150 years. So we were talking about how you can actually think of it in an engineering construct and then see the trees as mere impediments to progress. Or you can actually apply the human intelligence that we have and understand the sacredness of that space. But more importantly, you find that you can be still there in the middle of this metropolitan area. You can walk in there and walk from chaos into stillness. And that's a critical part. It's there in every one of us. It's just that we are not alert to that aspect in our lives, and we deaden ourselves. We are actually walking dead most of the time. We are just functional as organs doing talking things and all that, but are we truly alive? Unless it needs now to make an effort. That's the kind of conditions we have created. We have to make an effort to be truly alive. So that's what I mean by the sense of sacred, which even Ivan Illich relates with, that we treat water as a chemical, not as the entity which created life here. And I don't know if we all know this, but all the water we see around did not happen here. It came because comets kept on crashing over billions of years. That's where the water came from. It didn't come because some chemical reaction took place and produced water.
Could I just jump in, Atri?
Of course.
I think I want to. I was inspired by some of what Leo was saying as well, and I also want to speak to this idea of restraints. So again, I think the Frankfurt philosophers Adorno and Horkheimer pointed out that we've lost our sensuous immediacy with nature, which is the root cause of all the woes of modernity in one sense. And I think when we speak about the sacred, when we speak about shamanistic knowledge, when we speak about deep ecology, folks who are impatient for policy prescriptions or an economic model will be like, hey, that's cool, but I need a policy prescription I can give my government. That stuff is not what I really want. I hear you, but let's be pragmatic again, right? And what we forget is, I think even the discipline of economics has been hegemonized by one imagination, right? I don't know if you want to call it a Keynesian, post-Keynesian, or even a Sen-like imagination, which at some level will draw on to notions of utility. But once you sort of look wider, someone like E.P. Thompson is writing about moral economies a long time back. Buddhist economics, Gandhian economics. Take the example of Kurdistan, and I know Leo has possibly been there or has friends there. In a place like Rojava, unfortunately things have been disrupted recently, but there is a recognition that all economic relations will be subject to the restraint of democracy, gender emancipation, and ecology, right? And that is the way in which the economy is embedded into larger political social systems. So one can definitely imagine economic models, economic theory, economic theorists, and living examples of economic functioning, as long as you are willing to let go of your conditioning of these fundamental axioms that constitute our present day worldview when we think about and talk about economics in that sense. So just wanted to add those notes into what has been I think, lively conversation in the last few minutes.
Dipanshu, do you want to respond to that?
I think before probably
Yeah,
add.
Divya, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just and then after that maybe.
Yeah, I don't think I have very much to add because I mean, I agree very much with both the points made by Leo as well as Abhay. That definitely we do need to look even within these systems for diversity. And in terms of saying degrowth and capitalism is a problem and so on, I think that is also subject to this discussion about limits in terms of it has run beyond its limits, and that is why perhaps it has become such a big problem. And if we do foster or encourage some kinds of economic diversity as well as other types of diversity, perhaps that could be a way forward in terms of solutions. But also in this idea of stillness and this idea of just being and considering things, I think a clear example of how preventing, like how the system works to prevent its citizens from being that way, is how China got out of the recession in 2008 2009 by taking all its citizens and pushing them into dam building and construction and infrastructure. And in a matter of 3 or 4 years they consumed more cement than the USA had done in 100 years before that. So this direct correlation between this lack of stillness, because they definitely wanted their citizens to be active and be involved in various activities and not be jobless, produced this kind of dark environmental result, which was exactly the opposite of where we should be headed. And when speaking to people from the Chinese government, the underlying rationale was if they had hundreds of thousands of people jobless after a recession, they would perhaps sit and think about what the government was doing and where their country was headed, and perhaps it would have led to political turmoil. And so this idea of stillness is clearly needed if we have to really rethink the way we live right now, and if we have to overthrow regimes, we need to have some time to do it. We need to have some time to think about it.
Right, Dipanshu?
Yeah, just, I mean, one quick point, and this is something which I think takes us to the kind of questions we've been, I mean, the collecting throughout the day, because we had a session in the morning trying to have a dialogue with the civil society members working directly with farmers and on issues of food security. The second session was with people who are in the startup business, right, in food, and basically all of those we would consider who are in the business community and the corporations. And frankly, it was a fascinating conversation because I was expecting a lot of kind of away the sort of conversation from what we were having in the morning and maybe now. But it seems that there's a dialogue happening there as well, which one needs to be aware of. But as there are temporalities in processes of knowledge creation, is there a case to be made between, I mean, particularly I would say, and I will be very critical on this, I think there is almost a radical revolutionary need for the intellectual community to get to business. And I say that, what I mean is, I think we have distanced ourselves too much in our process of valuing the intellect as a way of perceiving whatever is happening around us, in kind of distancing ourselves into thoughts of abstraction. What it does is, the earlier point that Divya made around waste, is that I consider a lot of thoughts as important as that is, the gift of imagination that is, to be quite distanced from the kind of realities that one is finding. And I think that is a product of the linguistic hegemony and the kind of the umbrella of law, language, knowledge that was colonized, and that process of decolonization that perhaps that didn't happen for a long period. But maybe, as I said, that there are temporalities of knowledge creation. Maybe there is a case for recycling of alternative forms of linguistic heterogeneity to also emerge. that happens through oral conversations, and maybe through that textual or visual imagination as well. And we consciously within the center, I think, are trying now to really get on the field in the way of understanding what communities themselves are saying. So let me put it this way. There's a whole process over the next 6 months to just listen actually what's happened, because there's a conscious need of too much to do, right? Like there's something that you must be doing to create an impact. But if you just go and listen, in fact, there's a lot happening. All you need to do is put in that and process it in different forms of languages and knowledge and communicate that. So just on that note, and then maybe Atre, and I think they.
Yeah. Let me just say a couple of things as we close this discussion, which has been a fascinating discussion. I want to put into the discussion the word. Yeah, sure.
Be brief, but just because Abhay raised this issue of Rojava, yes, I did go there 4 years ago, and I've been part of the Kurdish people's movements to try and establish peace in the Middle East, and I'm small part of it. But Öcalan, their leader, has been incarcerated for 19 years now on an island by Turkey. It's a draconian state, Turkey. So it kind of speaks to Erdogan's politics that he jailed Öcalan, because if you read his book, The Prison Writings, it is essentially an argument for an earth which builds itself on what he calls confederal democracy. Right? It's not a democracy of nation states, but it's a democracy of holding on to your nature as a people, such as the Kurdish people are, but across the artificial constructs that we have created in humanity. And he goes on to describe with great detail the importance of enforcing on ourselves the idea of restraint. And the restraint doesn't come just like that. Restraint is an outcome of responsibility, and which speaks to the resilience that can be there when you have the capacity to recall past actions and see how the next stop that you make in your progress is going to be more responsible than the one before, right? So it's that kind of thing. And I just want to stop by saying that Rojava, the revolution in Rojava, there's a book on that, is about actually understanding that violence starts in the family, that it becomes eventually war when a man and a woman are not able to respect each other as beautiful expressions of being alive as humans, or now the third gender. We unfortunately unconsciously or consciously buried that for thousands of years, right? There were times when before people did not see man, women, and third gender as, they didn't hide third gender, they celebrated it. See? So we have come from that positive cultural context to a very negative cultural context, and now legally trying to restore that balance. But that said, I think the idea is to try and find that space, the harmony within families, within communities, within offices, within schools, colleges. It's really not trying to stop being argumentative, but trying to be harmonious with those argumentation, right? I want to also end by saying that because China came up with Divya's comments, there's a book by Jonathan Watts. And when you said about the cement, right? Just think about it. How much cement was poured in a few years, which took generations. Another indicator of how Jonathan Watts says that is, China built 70,000 kilometers of expressways in less than a decade, Deng Xiaoping and post-Xiaoping era. What America took 6 decades to build. So does the earth have the capacity to absorb that kind of extraction? So it's an extractive society. So when a billion Chinese jump is the title of the book by Jonathan Watts, which looks at, and I would say that it is required reading for everyone to realize you cannot afford it anymore. You cannot, somebody did it. That doesn't mean everyone can at all even achieve it. But here we are as India moving forward in that direction. And that would be a colossal collapse.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, panelists. Let me just say a couple of sentences in closing. I want us to think as we kind of tear apart the moral impoverishment of capitalism, let me say a few words thinking about what makes it stick. There's a philosopher, Susan Buckmore, in New York, who wrote a book titled Dream Worlds and Catastrophe. And I find that double bind, dream worlds and catastrophe, as a very useful way to unpack capitalism. Capitalism brings in catastrophes, especially natural, human rights catastrophes, diseases, epidemics, etc. And also simultaneously, concomitantly, opens up, unravels dream worlds, which is why it is so seductive. Can we imagine a world without capitalist luxury, even if we cannot afford it? What Walter Benjamin and others like Susan McMurray have made us know about capitalism, and I feel like philosophers are better equipped to unpack capitalism than economists are. But Walter Benjamin and others have had us believe that seeing a luxury product in a shop creates the subjectivity of capital. I start desiring it even if I cannot afford it. And that's when capital starts psychologizing, the kind of deepening its roots in the psychology of a citizen subject who starts desiring things in a shopping mall that he probably cannot afford in his lifetime. And it's this desire economy that is very hard to dismantle. It's probably easier to dismantle the structures and the infrastructures of companies and governments and so on. But it's what is in the minds of people, this desire for beautiful things, what Marx calls commodity fetish. And capital tends to metabolize this desire and create people who are loyal, persons whose lifetime is spent in loyalty to the desire economy, and therefore they're slaves of capital. And very many of us are included in that process. Sometimes I like buying expensive things because it makes me feel good, and that feel good economy is very hard to, that dream economy is very hard to unpack and dismantle. So I will close here thanking Abhiraj Nayak, Leo Saldana, and Divya Karnat for extremely thoughtful insights and painting a utopian horizon towards a less cannibalistic, a less extractive economy. And I want to thank Dipanshu Mohan for leading the CIDS into this event, Debasmita Nayak and Sanskrita Tripathi for doing all the groundwork and introducing us into this wonderful panel discussion. And thank you everyone for taking the time, and hopefully I extend my solidarities, and hopefully the struggle will continue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Debasmita, did you want to add anything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I just wanted to thank all of you for all the time and efforts you have put in. And after all this discussion, it has been so thought-provoking and inspiring. I'm just inspired more to think and do more and talk less. So I just don't feel I'm in a position to respond to all the inspiring talks that we have had. I think I'm more inspired to pause, like Leo sir particularly mentioned, and to soak myself in a process of self-awareness and self-evolution. So that is all I would say. Thank you.
Stillness is actually, stillness includes the argumentation of dissent.
That's such a wonderful statement, sir.
If you don't argue to dissent, then you'll be non-existent. So you better be.
That's wonderful. So may I just request, and if the panelists don't mind, we're in the process of closing the workshop. We're in fact just waiting for our dean, that's Dean Kathleen, to come in. But we do have our associate dean, Dr. Joyny, present here. Joyny, are you here? There is just a set of announcements that we had, and I'm quite sure that the panelists, if they don't mind just sticking around for a few minutes, and anybody who wants to leave can please do so. That's totally fine. But this is concerning those who have put in all the phenomenal effort in getting this. This has been a 2.5 months process of ideation in the making. I just want to kind of put it out there. We started having the conversation in early July. In the months of, I would say, the lockdown, post-lockdown period, when each of the students, in fact, in their own respective personal lives, were absorbing a lot. I think each of them have taken up the mantle for getting this not only organized, but I think really coming up with a lot of excellent thoughts. In fact, the whole idea of doing a roundtable of case study based presentations this morning, which is just a fascinating way of introducing, was done to kind of de-link the emphasis on experts, for example, coming and starting an inaugural roundtable to set the agenda. So students wanted to kind of get in first and say, oh, we have some case studies to present. Professor Joyni was there as one of the discussants, so she can add a little bit more to her own experience. But in the time that I think the Dean is joining in, may I just take this opportunity. Joyni, are you here? If we can see you, that would be.
Yes,
She's
here.
Sorry, I was just talking to Kathleen.
Yeah, and she's here. The Dean, I think she's joined in.
Yes, so she's here. And,
great. Great. So, Vishnuji, can we just make the Dean one of the co-hosts? And Dean, we're good to go for your remarks, and then make the announcement.
I want to tell you, I think I was on the wrong Zoom because I've been listening for a half hour already.
Great. Okay, I think we have Vishnuji. Can we just make the Dean one of the co-hosts? And Dean, we're good to go for your remarks, and then make the announcement.
I want to tell you, I think I was on the wrong Zoom because I've been listening for a half hour already.
There's some feedback.
I think you'd have to close the YouTube.
Kathleen, can you close the YouTube video?
Dean, we're good to go for your.
Where is it coming from?
Andre, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but there's some feedback, Kathleen.
Well, let me go back.
Yeah, I think she has both the windows on. That's
Kathleen, can you switch off the YouTube?
Dipanshu, if someone can call her.
Yeah, I mean, she's in the US. I don't have internet.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
So
Joyni is calling her.
Yeah. We're just gonna give it a minute. That's fine. In the meantime, let me just share my screen and just put on what the announcements are about, and we're just gonna wait for the Dean to add her closing remarks. And this is I don't think that the organizers are much aware about this. Okay. So I hope Adit, Snehal, Vanshika are all here. Yeah. Okay, so I think we have the Dean back now. So give her the co-host rights, Vishnuji.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so ma'am, we can't see you yet. You could just.
Oh.
Now you're fine. We can see you now.
I can see her. I can see her.
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry that there was a confusion. I was able to listen to the last half hour, fascinating conversation, and listening to your remarks and everything you have to say, that so many ideas were coming into my mind. Thank you again, Dipancho and the whole team, for organizing this wonderful program. I'm sorry I missed the case studies. And I'm sorry I missed the other points as well, because I feel that right now, the situation that we're in and that we've been in, but as someone mentioned, the pandemic has put in startling frame what are some of the problems facing everyone today. And I would like to say that what I think is really important is bringing in young people, students, bringing in the people who are primarily concerned, people who are, say, you've had, the ones who are affected by climate change, by climate issues, by political decision-making, and yet who are seemingly voiceless or who have chosen spokespeople who have not explained the entire situation to them. I'll make a couple of comments. I have had a lot of experience working in the field in various countries, and I've found that probably the most useful way of solving some of the problems is bringing people together. And I think one of the more difficult things to look at is not to consider the intellectual research scientific community the sole spokespeople of what's going on in the world, the sole decision makers. I think that's very hard to destroy that, to change the rapport that exists with the, let's say, glorification, rightly or not rightly so, of scientific knowledge, of the ability to put an argument in intellectual terms. And I'm not anti-intellectual, but I have found that people expressing themselves in their own terms through solving problems through participatory action is often the most important way for meaningful, long-lasting decisions to be made. And I brought this up at another conference. I'd been working in popular human rights, learning for maybe 20 years working in the field. And whereas the organizations, the government financing, the funding has disappeared in many of the instances, what I have found in keeping up with people, say in Africa, in Brazil, Costa Rica, is that when people have taken control of their own programs, of their own projects, of their own decision-making, when they are able to describe their problems and their world in their own terms, those are the most lasting lessons that come forward. I believe that, again, I'm a strong believer in human rights. I believe that human rights are for everyone. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, where do you find human rights? You find them in the smallest places. You find them in the home, you find them in the kitchen, you find them in the factory, find them in the fields. And I think that's where we're going to find solutions to things in these areas. So I applaud this initiative completely. I'd just like to make a comment. I'm so sorry I didn't get into or didn't understand or hear the whole conversation about stillness, because I love the term harmonious argument. And I feel that harmonious argument is something that, now that I'm in the United States, that we found with our dearly loved Justice, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was the fact that she could speak to people everywhere, respect what they had to say everywhere in society, and be able to have arguments that were respectful. It didn't diminish the strength of what someone had to say, but in a state of passion, I think people express a lot. Let's not try to negate passion when people are talking. Let's try and negate or limit violence. But I do believe that people talking to each other, then arguing, standing back, and reflecting on what was said will move us forward as a society. I found that, and I didn't hear everyone's discussions, I'm sorry. Andre, I was really interested in what you said, the feel-good economy, because that brought to mind the poor economics with Duflo and Banerjee. That was such an eye-opener to me, reading that and seeing how people make decisions. And I felt that really, going into the field, using evidence, people's own words and their own choices and how they made it is so very valuable. We can learn from that. Coming back to the United States, and I'm sure you get parallel types of examples. One thing I learned coming back now, I'm paying attention to churches. I'll tell you why. Because I have found that the churches, not the intellectual churches, not the ones that prescribe a certain political following, but really kind of like the bedrock grassroots churches are the places where different elements of society meet. I found that in my own country now, and in the own town where I live, African Americans, Native Americans, migrants, small business people, people who are heading local government, all meet in these churches. And in the church meetings afterwards, churches that try to be inclusive, problems, local problems that are a reflection of the national and international problems get thrashed out. So thank you for this initiative. I found it just very inspiring. And I can hardly wait to see the write-up, the following. I think you're going to get a publication out of this. And I'd like to see the continuation, because this is certainly an unending struggle that we're seeing. It's not going to go away. There's never a final solution. It's dynamic. And I believe that initiatives like the ones you've taken now, the work that people are doing in this area, participating, is extremely meaningful. So thank you for being patient with me, and continue.
Yeah, well, just to close things off, and I know Sanskrita has a closing statement. So Sanskrita, we're going to ask you to quickly go through that, and I have the announcement to make and then we'll close because we're running short of time.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, great.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So as all good things come to an end in life, so is this workshop. And on behalf of the Center for New Economic Studies, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this ISDS 2020 workshop on acclimatized emergencies, organized by Conservation in Development Studies team. That is CIDS team. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Caitlin, Dean and Professor of Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, for her kind words and appreciation. And I would also like to express my gratitude towards all the esteemed panelists and who have taken time out of their busy schedules to be a part of this workshop. I would also like to thank all the faculty moderators, Ma'am Akriti Bhatia, Professor Rhonda Chaudhary, and Professor Trey Majumdar for moderating each session and providing constant support and guidance. I would also like to express my gratitude towards Professor Joini Banerjee and Professor Mini Roy for their active participation and support in making our workshop a success. I would also like to thank Professor Dipanshu Mohan, the Director for Center for New Economic Studies, for his valuable insights and constant guidance for making this workshop a success. I would also like to thank all my colleagues at CIDS who have worked day and night to make this workshop happen in such difficult circumstances. Lastly, I would like to thank our Nickel and Dime team members who have participated in the roundtable with their amazing presentations. And on the behalf of all of us, I would like to thank our IT team and logistics team, as this workshop would not be possible without your constant support. Thank you, everybody. Good evening.
Thank you. And now it's the time for the announcement to come in. I'm going to ask each of the students. So, Joini, can we see you if it's possible?
Yes, sure.
Yes. And so we're going to just synchronize our, I don't know, claps, if we can get the audios on. This is a small moment of appreciation for all the students who were involved as the organizers of today, but the torchbearers of change for a better tomorrow. I think this is when Dean Kathleen says that this should be the beginning and not the end of the kind of dynamism that's needed, with the restraint and the stillness that we need to practice in our conduct. I think this is the highlight of what I think we've come to in the conversation we had over the last 2 hours. Just an announcement for each and every student who was involved in the process. And with that, let me ask, and we can then see probably just names of students popping in. So the first is Tamanna.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, right. Sanskrita.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Debusmita.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Samiksha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Vanshika, there are students from Ashoka working with the center and engaged with Nickel and Dime.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Snehal.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Siddharth. So Siddharth is one of the columnists who writes frequently on issues of environment and policy, and has been engaged with Nickel and Dime as one of our columnists. And finally, Adit Shankar. I want to just, before we close, just take this opportunity to thank Leo sir, Abhay, Atria, Divya, and the rest of the team for staying back, and I think just helping us see this through the end for today. But I think it's given me a set of a lot of planning and ideation to do for the tomorrow that we have to get into. And so I think the students have a lot to do. So while we have kind of cajoled you into the process of organizing this was also the process of creating a blueprint of an action plan that we need to now get ourselves into and geared for. We had 3 excellent sessions. Recordings of all of that has been already made available. So I'm going to share that with all our respective panelists, the dean and everyone. So these recordings are going to be shared tonight itself. The write-up is going to be produced in form of a journal issue that is going to be released towards the end of the month. So I look forward to having any inputs that the panelists may want to share based on what they've said from the journal issue draft that we write and kind of review. The team will be working now towards it, but thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.
Just before I leave, I would just like to say
Siddharth, please, we need to see you, but
No, just that before we leave, I just want to say thank you because I didn't get to say thank you and while you were introducing me right now. And also on behalf of Adit Shankar, who also missed that opportunity, I'd like to say thank you so much. It's indeed an honor to be presenting in this wonderful workshop. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. We'll close the session now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for having us.